Cassius is the only one of his like coworkers who makes it up to the top, and he kind of, a lot of people end up, parading these stories of success as anybody could do it. Well, in fact, not everybody can. The only reason you're able to make it to the top is by backstabbing and exploiting the people around you. And I think it's very interesting to see, the striking, seeing words like scab being thrown out in the film. Very interesting. I know some people may not like the ending or like the very last act because it gets kind of fucking crazy. I won't sugarcoat it, but I honestly love this. I love a film that has a pretty solid critique on capitalism, and it knows what's happening materially in the world, because I feel sometimes that some directors or writers, their analysis or critique is kind of weak, but this is strong. So for me, it's a solid 5 out of 5. Sorry if I keep looking down. I'm looking at my phone at my reviews. The following film is Amores Perros, which came out in 2000, and it is directed by Alejandro González Iñárritu. He's a Mexican director. So this film takes place in Mexico, and it stars, the only actor I really know in this is Gael Bernal Garcia. But it is a bunch of stories, and they're kind of connected by a car crash. And Amores Perros, I think, there's a lot to say about this film. I absolutely loved it. Like I said, all these characters are living their own lives, but they're connected by a car crash. And in this car crash, we kind of see the lives of these individuals, and they're kind of, in this film, in the title it says Amores Perros, so the perros, the dogs, kind of represent the person in this film and the journey they are going through. We have Gael Bernal Garcia's character of Octavio, who is kind of like a dude. He's unemployed, he lives with his family, and he's in love with his brother's wife, essentially her girlfriend, and he's broken. He wants this woman, Susana, to leave with him, but he's broke, and in order to make money, he uses his brother's dog. I don't know what the dog was called. I totally forgot. Uses the dog in like dog fighting to kind of make that money, but it's a very dirty, dangerous business, and that's one of the stories. And then the next story is the one of, what's her name? I think it was like Valeria or something. Can't really remember off the top of my head, but her character is another woman who is like a supermodel. She's having an affair with this man in a company, and she ends up getting in a car accident, which is caused by Octavio's character. And we see through her dog the fault in her relationship with this man she's been having an affair with. And then the last act is this assassin character. He's kind of like a broke guy. He's got the chivo, and he ends up taking Octavio's dog. But all these lives are kind of intertwined with each other, and it's so interesting because there is love, money, betrayal, revenge, and I can admit, while watching this, I felt kind of queasy. I don't know if it was also because of the morning, but it is pretty graphic, and there is this like gritty texture to the film, which I kind of like. The acting, in my opinion, is phenomenal, and the soundtrack is good. I'm sorry if I'm not explaining it well. I don't want to spoil too much, and I feel like I kind of already have, but my bad. But I honestly would watch Amores Perros. I don't know if they have it on streaming, because I kind of watched it on DVD, because it is my older sister's favorite film, and since she has it on DVD, I watched it on DVD. But yeah, it's really good. I give it a solid 4 out of 5, and I'm honestly just really noticing I have a lot of foreign films on this list. Not a bad thing, but hopefully it's not something that turns you guys off. I know for some people they don't like watching movies with subtitles, but hey, give it a chance. It's really interesting. So the following film is Sicario, which came out in 2015, and it is directed by Denis Villeneuve. And this film, if you don't know what the term Sicario is, I'm pretty sure it's a term they use in Mexico to like talk about like a hitman. It's hitman basically. So the story focuses around a woman who is a FBI agent, and I think she's like based in Arizona. I can't remember. It's one of those states that borders Mexico. And you know, she's kind of seeing how this drug trafficking is impacting her job, and she kind of wants to do something. And she is kind of recruited to be a part of this operation, which is meant to take out like the head guy of this cartel organization, I'm assuming. And everything is kind of suspenseful. I would say throughout this whole film, it is filled with suspense, and I'm kind of feeling like when I was watching it, I was like, okay, what's gonna happen next? Because I truly could not tell. But as she gets herself involved in this operation, she really finds out she knows very little of what's truly going on, and that things are not doing as the law says, or this operation is not really happening under the quote-unquote law that is put in place, or world laws are put in place so that countries don't do things they're not supposed to do. And in a way, you kind of see her character slowly become disillusioned by her job and just what is being asked by her. And while this character, I think her name was like, what's her name? Kate, I was right, her name was Kate. Kate is being disillusioned, and she's kind of like the central character in the beginning. I find her character be kind of, the spotlight is kind of taken away from her once Benicio del Toro's character of Alejandro is introduced. He is such a weird, elusive figure. You don't really know much about him. He's kind of confusing or mysterious in a way, and I'll say the performance he gives towards the last half of the film, I was not expecting that, but honestly, it was great. Honestly, one thing I'll point out is my favorite scene in the film is there's a scene where they're on the freeway. That was awesome. Curtis is Jamie Lee Lynch. Curtis is dad, which was so funny because looking at both of them, I realized, dude, she has his face. They look alike. But I will say you have to watch it because the very end is truly, not to be childish, but it's so funny to me. Like, now if you did something like that, people would get mad and be like, this is spreading propaganda to our children. Nah, it's funny as hell, and like, we need more stuff like this. I need more men to dress up as women for comedy. Like some silly shit. Like, this is funny. I'm sorry if the review's short, but I'm gonna move on to a very long film that I watched that actually came out recently. Most of the things I've watched are old, but I'm just watching them for the first time. But this is new, and I watched it in theaters, and it is Project Hail Mary, which stars Ryan Gosling, and it focuses on a man who is sent to a space mission to kind of get something to save the sun. And I honestly was not expecting this film to be almost 70% of Ryan Gosling. And usually when films have like one character who is present for nearly the whole time, like, you don't get to see other characters as much. It is kind of a hit or miss, but I think this is it's not a miss. I think he did a pretty good job. He has the charisma to be the focus of the film for nearly like 90% of it. But I honestly really like this film. I kind of wish I saw it in not theaters, on IMAX, but I don't have IMAX money. Shoot me. But it really is heartwarming. You know, get you teary-eyed and get you to think about humanity and the connections we make with people, and how, you know, I don't know, for me when watching it, I thought about isolation and how sometimes these connections we make with people or beings can really hit you hard in the heart. But yeah, also, if you love a good space film with some nice visuals, I think this is something worth seeing in theaters. I can't remember, but the cinematographer, I'm looking it up, so sorry if I'm looking down on my screen. The cinematographer for this is Greg Fraser, and he is an amazing cinematographer. He is the cinematographer for Dune Part 1 and 2, The Batman, Rogue One, and The Creator. And whether or not you don't like, you know, the scripts of those films, I guess you could say visually those films are stunning, and I think having him as cinematographer for this was an amazing choice. I think he has proven himself on multiple occasions to be great at doing space films. Sorry for the noise, but I'm gonna move on to the last film, and this one is a Paul Thomas Anderson film. This is my fifth Paul Thomas Anderson movie, and it is The Master, which came out in 2012, and it stars Philip Seymour Hoffman, Joaquin Phoenix, Amy is his